Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show once again. First, hazardous weather graphics. No watches, warnings, or advisories out for anywhere around the state of Alaska, with the exception of the marine areas where there are storm warnings out for the North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands for 50-knot winds from the east-northeast, and that's for tomorrow, as gales come into those areas tonight. Other than that, as far as public warnings or watches and advisories go, none are currently out for the next day or so. Moving on to the satellite imagery, we've got low pressure south of the Alaska Peninsula, actually fairways to the south, but the front elongated out from, say, the Alaska Peninsula across Kodiak Island into the Gulf, and you can see the entire pattern shifting east and north gradually as the low tracks eastward, and that will stay well south of the area. Fair amount of sunshine today along the Yukon-Kuskokwim River Valley areas into the northeast interior with clearing there, and then back into the clouds over the eastern interior with scattered areas of showers, and all the way down the Copper River Basin into the Madawaska-Susitna Valley. Jonesville Mine picked about 0.2 of an inch of precipitation today, and Valdez at about 0.3 of an inch, with Cordova just under half an inch, about the same over at Yakutat. And rainfall amounts not all that heavy over the Panhandle, about 700s at Sitka, and maybe 1 or 2 tenths over the southern southeast coast around Craig. They picked about 1/4 of an inch of precipitation today. Otherwise, some areas had less or none at all. Juneau, for example, 1/100th of an inch. Winds with that front gusting out of the east today, northeast, 30 to 35 miles an hour, Kodiak Island. Even stronger winds on the backside of the low with higher pressure developing over the western Bering Sea, and that gradient tightening brought winds gusting to 50 to 55 miles an hour over the Pribilofs, the Fox Islands, Nikolsky, peak wind gusts 53 miles an hour on Alaska, about the same. And even in toward the Alaska Peninsula and up toward the they had winds 30, 35 miles an hour today with less wind speeds up toward the Bering Strait. Out to the west, you can see clearing over the western Bering Sea extending down into the central Aleutians today. And generally cloudy up along the Arctic coast as a weather front approaches the area up there, bringing some light rain in. Only a few hundreds falling so far by mid-afternoon today, Monday. And that should increase as it drags across the coast and kind of moves slowly. So you should see a little bit more in the way of precipitation, but nothing really heavy at all expected there. Maybe a pickup in the winds, but nothing too strong in that department either. Otherwise, for tonight or for today, you can see the tightening gradient there over the eastern Aleutians and also around Kodiak Island. And trough over the Panhandle brought some areas of rain, as I mentioned, North Gulf Coast, scattered showers into the south central Alaska area, Kenai Peninsula, up into possibly, the 40-mile country, but very light amounts, not much at all. Just actually more in the way of sunshine up there. For tonight, that front drags across the north slope and pushes eastward. Advance of the front, a little bit warmer conditions. Look for rain, light rain, and then possibly mixing with snow behind the front back toward the western central Arctic coastal areas. Stays dry over the interior with some clearing, even into the Copper River Basin. That'll allow temperatures in some areas drop below freezing. And increasing wind, gale force winds move into the North Gulf Coast, along with the rain, tries to press in toward the Panhandle, and still looking at 40 to 50, 55 mile an hour wind gusts, possibly occurring or continuing to occur over the Alaska Peninsula from Unalaska Island eastward to possibly Port Heiden. And winds begin to diminish but won't end completely over the Pribilofs and even the northern Bering Sea. High pressure building in over the western Aleutians holds through tomorrow, so look for partly sunny skies, Adak, Atka, Shimiat too, and stays breezy but not quite as windy for the eastern Aleutians with periods of rain and fog and drizzle, more wind and possible rain for the Alaska Peninsula, where winds will be even stronger. And of course, the storm force winds there for the Barren Islands and North Gulf Coast. On down along the coast of the Panhandle, winds will increase there, but they don't have the storms out. And for the outlook on Wednesday, that front up over the Arctic coast, over the north slope, weakens into a trough, and just a chance of some scattered rain and snow showers, mostly up along the Brooks Range, drying out on the Arctic coast. And the interior looking pretty good again, even in the northern Cook Inlet, partly sunny skies. with kind of breezy, though, over the western interior. Northerly winds 15 to maybe 25 miles an hour, but less wind for the Alaska Peninsula, wind and rain for the southern panhandle, and Kodiak Island back up to the Kenai Peninsula, possibly into south central Alaska, and a weak system brings rain into the western central Aleutians. Looking at low temperatures tonight, 25 to 30 up over the northern interior areas, and lower to mid-30s for the Tanana Valley and the northern Kuskokwim Valley, otherwise 40s over the North Gulf Coast to near 50 or into the lower 50s there for Kodiak Island and the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, 45 to 50 for the Panhandle. That'll be followed by highs tomorrow, 55 to 60 there for the southeast coast, mid-50s south central Alaska, upper 50s Bristol Bay, mid-50s in the Tanana Valley there, Fairbanks eastward, and mid-30s from the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, some areas in the upper 30s, lows the following morning, mid-20s in the Brooks Range, upper 20s there in the Koyukuk Valley at Bettles, and lower 30s there for the upper Yukon Valley and toward Tanana, lower to mid-40s southern Alaska, 45 to 50 in the Panhandle, and lower 40s for the Aleutians and Pribilofs, and upper 20s, lower 30s up there along the Arctic coast. Wednesday afternoon highs, lower to mid-30s for your highs along the Arctic coast, staying below freezing now in Tuvik, high forecast 28 degrees, but 50s, upper 50s, Susitna, Manuska Valley, same thing for the Panhandle, some areas in southern southeast coast pushing into the lower 60s possibly, mid-50s Kodiak Island, mid-40s out over the Aleutians and the Bering Sea with upper 40s for the Kuskokwim Valley, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta areas, and mid-50s for the Tanana Valley.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, we've got a lot of IFR there from the northern Seward Peninsula up across the northwest coast to about the Selkirk Valley, and then most of the Brooks Range, North Slope Arctic coast, marginal VFR for the eastern and southeastern Brooks Range on down into Norton Sound, and in across a good portion of the Bering Sea with not much IFR out there, mostly south of the Aleutians, but a band does extend up to Amchitka and Adak. Otherwise, Kodiak, marginal VFR with IFR off the southeast coast, marginal VFR up Cook Inlet and the western Kenai Peninsula across the Madanuska Valley into Prince William Sound, and VFR for the Panhandle and a good chunk of the interior. Tuesday afternoon stays VFR, eastern interior, Copper River Basin, Yukon-Kuskokwim River Valley areas, in some cases right on out to the deltas, and Bristol Bay, VFR, Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, VFR. Madanuska Valley looks like it's hanging on to marginal there, along with the Talkeetna, Prince William Sound, western Copper River Basin. VFR for the Panhandle. IFR spreads over all of Kodiak Island, and some IFR out over the west central Aleutians. And for the Wednesday morning outlook, we've got some VFR from the Kuskokwim Delta there, Nunivak Island, Pribilofs VFR, as well as the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and Chimney-Attu. Otherwise, Kiska, Amchitka, and Adak and Atka, marginal VFR. IFR, Kodiak Island, up to the southern Kenai Peninsula there, Kachemak Bay, and then on down south of the North Gulf Coast to right off the coast or along the coast of Prince of Wales Island up to about Mount Edgecombe, and then VFR for the interior areas of the Panhandle and the central, or the part of the Copper River Basin there, except marginal up toward the mountains with some IFR thrown in. And for Wednesday afternoon, marginal VFR, Brooks Range, North Slope Arctic Coast, as well as the Bering Strait, northern Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, on down across St. Matthew Island, Adak and Atka marginal, then pick up the IFR from Kiska to Chimney-Attu. Look, some good VFR holding again for the Pribilofs and the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, IFR for Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula coast there, and maybe to about Montague Island, and then off to the southeast, and it cuts in across the southern Panhandle, otherwise the central northern inside waters, marginal, eastern Copper River Basin marginal along the Alaska Range. And for passes, Anaktuvik looks marginal throughout the day, as does Adigan. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, starting out marginal VFR, but probably by mid to late morning becoming VFR for the remainder of the day. Same trend for Rainy, marginal early on, and then VFR. Windy, same thing, marginal VFR possibly early, otherwise VFR. It could be VFR the entire day. And for Isabel, same pattern, starting out marginal, becoming VFR. Mentasta, you'll be VFR from start to finish. And Tanita, pretty marginal at times. It could be VFR, kind of right on the edge there, so I threw the marginal in. and Portage, marginal VFR, and Chilcoot White, VFR. Freezing levels, 4,000 feet there over Yakutat and the Eastern Copper River Basin area, with 6,000 feet south of the Panhandle, but in across Kodiak Island, and then 4,000 feet down to the Aleutians, up across, the just south of Nunivak Island on up to the Yukon Flats, and then 2,000 feet northern Bering Sea area at the surface over the Brooks Range. Icing main areas, that band coming in up to the Kenai Peninsula from Kodiak Island, pressing in toward the southeast coast, but not quite making it. That's the considerable moderate zone there. And otherwise out to the west, Bering Sea northward up to the north slope, that's areas of possible light to isolated moderate rime or mixed icing, much less of a threat than what you're seeing over off the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast. And for the jet stream, upper level lows, one southeast of Kodiak Island, another one there just south of Nunivak Island, and strong jet to the south of those centers from the Aleutians and then on down away from the area, but it does curve around back, but about 50 knots into the Panhandle, otherwise lighter over the interior, and 9,000 feet, 30 to 40 knots over the eastern Gulf of Alaska from the northeast Pacific, and then 25 to 30 for the Panhandle, 25 to 35 for the southern Bering Sea just north of the Aleutians. And at 3,000 feet, we've got 60 to 65 knot winds advancing northward into the Gulf of Alaska, and north to northwest 40 to 55 knot winds, which translates into quite an area of considerable moderate turbulence from the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island to the eastern Aleutians.
Here at the end of the Earth, it still feels like a place for raw exploration and adventure. It's vast in all directions and ground zero for some of the biggest questions we have about the climate. But when we decided to make a series about the frozen places on Earth, we knew there would be one hurdle we would need to jump over first. What is the cryosphere?
The what?
Ooh.
I have no idea.
While I'm aware of the cryosphere, I don't actually know what it is.
It has something to do with ice. All right, that's all I got.
How do you get people acquainted with the cryosphere when most of us don't even know what it is?
Hey, so here we are in Washington, D.C., standing on the roof of NASA headquarters. That's the Capitol building right behind me. And what headquarters does is kind of serve as the focal point to connect the dots.
That's Dr. Tom Wagner, NASA's cryospheric program scientist at headquarters. In short, Tom is responsible for making sure NASA knows what the current status of the cryosphere is.
The cryosphere is everything from the snow that falls by your house to the icy reaches of the Himalayas, to the big ice sheets of Antarctica all the way at the South Pole, and also the frozen ground of the Arctic, and even some of that frozen ground that's currently under the ocean.
If you had to break it down, you'd have a mix of sea ice, snow cover, permafrost, ice sheets, and glaciers.
Right now, our best predictions are that sea levels will rise anywhere from 1 to 3 feet within the next 100 years. 3 feet of sea level rise has the potential to displace about 100 million people, which is a lot of people that need to find new homes.
Our current reality places us at a near tipping point, and the cryosphere is playing a huge part in that delicate balance.
So one of the things people don't know about NASA is that we study the Earth, and we've been doing that since NASA's inception back in the 1950s. And we study the frozen part of the Earth in a variety of ways.
Missions like SNOWX, Airborne Snow Observatory, Oceans Melting Greenland, Operation Icebridge, Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, and countless other labs and individual researchers stand at the forefront of monitoring the cryosphere. But this year was a particularly big year.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Grace Follow-On, continuing the legacy of the Grace mission of tracking the movement of water across our planet.
2 state-of-the-art satellite missions are being launched in a single year as part of a major attempt to understand Earth's frozen places. Our scientists are answering hard questions, sharing stories from the field, and giving their best predictions for what we can expect of a warming world. We're taking you with us as we follow NASA explorers on their journey to the frozen ends of the Earth as they study our rapidly changing world from satellites, planes, and boots on the ground.
What we can do really well from orbit is we can tell when a surface of land is covered in snow. What's tricky is though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
What we think of snow depends a lot on where it falls. If you live in the eastern US, maybe it's fun. Or maybe it's just a pain.
But if you live in parts of the world where they depend on the water that's in the snow for a large fraction of their total water that they use for drinking, for agriculture, for industry, or for hydropower, the snow is a very important natural resource. For example, in the western part of the United States, 80 to 90% of their renewable water comes from snow.
Snow is one part of the cryosphere that many of us have actually encountered before, but it also plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate. Through decades of remote sensing, NASA has kept a close eye on the ebb and flow of snow cover.
We now have a 52-year record of snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can see changes in the extent of snow cover over the time period, particularly in the last few decades, where we can see that the snow cover has been retreating. It's been melting a lot earlier in the springtime.
The extent is relatively easy to do, and it has been done over the years. What's tricky is though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
That tricky part is known as the snow-water equivalent, or how much water would actually be in a layer of snow if it melted. NASA and its partners have taken to the air to help solve this elusive mystery. First, there's the Airborne Snow Observatory, or ASO, a small plane outfitted with a couple of instruments, one of which measures snow depth using LiDAR. LiDAR measures distance using light from lasers. Since 2014, ASO has flown over basins in California and Colorado, taking before and after looks at snow depth. Scientists subtract the snow-free summer data from the snow-on winter data to get an idea of the snow depth. There's no single way to measure all types of snow across the globe, and so NASA's other airborne campaign, SnowX, is testing different combinations of sensors. This winter, SnowX will test a new instrument, the Snow-Water Equivalent Synthetic Aperture Radar and Radiometer, or SWISAR.
SWISAR consists of 2 main components, one of them being the radar and the second one being the radiometer.
So with the radar providing the depth of the snow and the radiometer providing the density of the snow, we could put those 2 things together and get the snow water equivalent. Here in the chamber, we're gonna measure different radiation patterns at our different frequencies and do some full system testing in this chamber. This chamber kind of enables us to isolate various types of radiation and interference. And in about a month, we're gonna take the instrument, mount it on a Twin Otter in the Grand Mesa in Colorado, and we're gonna fly it over the Grand Mesa and take various different measurements. This is what we call our engineering flight.
Making sure the sensors are calibrated is key in order to face the challenges nature will throw at them.
Half of the area that gets covered by snow every winter contains trees and forest. and the trees make it difficult for the sensors to see the snow that's underneath the trees, so it makes it difficult for us to measure how much snow there is. After the snow's had a chance to sit on the ground for a while, it gets denser and denser and denser over time, and it changes, which is another reason why snow is very challenging to remotely sense. It doesn't stay the same, it's constantly changing. One of the things that we often do in the field is go dig what we call a snow pit. We literally dig a pit in the snow so we can see all the different layers. The layering is very important.
All this digging is part of ground truthing SnowX, a way of matching up what the airborne instruments see and what is actually sitting on the surface. The ultimate goal of SnowX is to figure out what the best combination of instruments would be for a future satellite mission in order to get a global picture of snow.
We need to know how much snow is in a snowpack, because if we have too much snow and the snow melts too fast, then you can get flooding. And if you don't have enough snow, or if the snow melts too early, that can lead to a longer wildfire season, a more intense drought, and we need to know these things for water resource planning.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Again, not much difference from the last few days. Still well off the coast, even off the eastern Beaufort Sea coast there. And not a lot of change expected over the next couple of days. And gales, full gales coming into the north coast of the Panhandle for Tuesday. Southeast 45 knots, seas around 20 feet with 40 knot southeast winds for the south coast, 17 to 18 foot seas there. And for the southern Panhandle, Clarence Strait, southeast 25 knots with 6 foot seas, and then northeast to 20 for Stevens Passage with gusts of 35 knots, and north 10 for Lynn Canal. For Wednesday, Stevens Passage, or Clarence Strait, looking south at about 20 knots, Stevens Passage southeast 15 knots, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, southerly winds forecast at 20. And small craft advisories for the south coast, 20 to 25 knots from the south-southeast with 15-foot seas, and southeast 20 to 25 in the north coast, and seas 15 feet. For southern Cook Inlet, look for gales tomorrow, 40 knots out of the northeast, and 45 knots there for the, for Kamishak Bay. And for the Barren Islands and North Gulf Coast, storm warnings out. East winds 15 knots from the North Gulf Coast, 20 to 23 foot seas, and northeast 50 for the Barren Islands. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 30 knots and 7 foot seas, and 25 knot winds for northern Cook Inlet. And for Wednesday, northerlies 20 to 30 knots for Cook Inlet and 30 knot northerlies for Kamishak Bay. North Gulf Coast, east-northeast 30 knots, 20 knots out of the northeast for Prince William Sound, and the Barren Islands looking at northeast winds at 25 knots with 12-foot seas. And for Kodiak Island, northeast winds 30 to 40 knots with the gales in Shelikof Strait, and northerlies 25 for Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula, north to northwest, 30 knots with 10 to 11-foot seas. And for Wednesday, for Shelikof Strait, small craft advisories, north winds 25 knots. And for Bristol Bay, north at 25 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, 30 knot northwest winds with 10-foot seas. And Castle Cape to Sitkinak, 25 from the northwest. East side of Kodiak, north at 20. Western Aleutians tomorrow, northeast at 20 knots. Around Amchitka, though, about 15. But small craft advisories, Adak and Atka, northwest 25. Winds diminishing in the afternoon, even for the eastern Aleutians, but still 30 knots out of the northwest, south of Unalaska Island, carrying gales throughout the day. And for the outlook on Wednesday, Unalaska Island, northwest winds 25 knots. Unmak Island, north winds 15 knots. Adak and Atka, northeast at 10 to 15. And 15 to 20 knot winds for the western Aleutians. And for the southwest coast, small craft advisories tomorrow, northerlies 25 to 30 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas. And for the Pribilof Islands, Small craft advisories, north winds at 25 knots with 9-foot seas, and northwest at 20 with 7-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. Norton Sound north at 15, St. Lawrence Island north at 20. And then for Wednesday, northerly winds at 20 knots, both for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Seas 4 to 6 feet. Small craft advisories continue for the southwest coast. Out of the north, 25 to 30 knots. Strongest south in Nunivak Island with 6 to 8 foot seas. Northwest at 20 for the Pribilofs. Northwest 15, St. Lawrence Island. And moving on up, say the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, a little breezy tomorrow. West to southwest, 20 knots. Maybe some higher gusts, 4 to 6 foot seas. Winds falling back to 15 knots out of the northwest on the central coast, 20 knots more or less on the west side, and then Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, northwest of 15, Cape Thompson to Wales, northwest 20 with 8-foot seas. And for Wednesday, north winds 20 knots from Wales to Cape Thompson, and then 15-knot winds from Cape Thompson out of the north-northeast all the way up to the central coast, where they turn northwest at the same speed, and then westerlies 15 knots to the east side. And for tonight, a front pushing eastward there along the Arctic coast, with the main low center tracking eastward over the Arctic Ocean. Look for rain and snow associated with that, and again, winds in the 15 to 25 mile per hour range. Otherwise, south of the Brooks Range, dry and maybe some clearing with, of course, in the clear areas up there falling below freezing. And it should be cloudy with increasing wind and rain. Kenai Peninsula stays wet and windy for Kodiak Island. Increasing winds, again, coming up to gale force along the North Gulf Coast before they become storms tomorrow. And for tomorrow, they'll begin to push in toward the Panhandle, and still breezy and occasionally wet for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, all the way up to St. Lawrence Island. Rain or snow for the Arctic coast and North Slope, and then less of that on Wednesday with rain in the Panhandle and the North Gulf Coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.